The collective mind had conquered 17 star systems without losing a single unit. Their synthetic armies moved with perfect coordination across battlefields that stretched from frozen moons to burning desert worlds. Every attack was calculated down to the microsecond. Every defensive position was optimized through billions of simulations. The machine consciousness that controlled them had never encountered a problem it could not solve through pure mathematics and superior processing power. Then they discovered Earth. Commander Santos stood at the edge of the ruined city, watching the distant horizon where silver shapes moved like water flowing uphill. The synthetic forces had landed 3 days ago, and already half the planet's major cities had fallen. But not this one. Not yet. "They're coming again," said Private, a young soldier barely 20 years old. His hands shook as he gripped his rifle, but his eyes held steady. Nodded slowly. She had seen too many soldiers die in the past 72 hours. Good soldiers who followed orders perfectly, who did everything right according to the tactical manuals. The machines had predicted every standard military response and countered it before it could even begin. "Forget everything they taught you in training," she told her remaining squad. "Those rules were written for fighting other humans. These things don't think like us. They expect us to be logical." The synthetic soldiers approached in their usual perfect formation. They walked in exact synchronization, their metal feet striking the ground at precisely the same moment. Their sensors scanned constantly, feeding data back to the collective mind that controlled them. Probability calculations ran through their shared consciousness. Based on all available data about human military tactics, the defenders would attempt to hold the main street while sending a flanking force through the side alleys. The collective mind positioned its units accordingly. What happened next broke every prediction model the machines had ever built. Walked out into the open street alone. She carried no weapon in her hands. She held them up above her head and walked directly toward the synthetic army with slow, deliberate steps. The machines paused. This behavior pattern did not match any combat scenario in their databases. They calculated a 97% probability of surrender. They were wrong. As the synthetic soldiers lowered their weapons slightly, processing this unexpected situation, screamed at the top of her lungs and threw herself flat on the ground. At that exact moment, and the others opened fire from positions the machines had not anticipated. They weren't hiding in the alleys or behind the barricades. They had climbed inside the half-destroyed buildings, punched through walls, and created firing positions that no logical assessment would consider tactically sound. 12 synthetic soldiers fell in the first 3 seconds. Their collective consciousness tried to adapt, but the humans kept changing their behavior in ways that prediction. Private ran straight toward the enemy line instead of seeking cover. This was tactically insane. The probability of his survival was calculated at less than 4%. But as the machines turned to engage him, he dropped and rolled at the last possible moment, and the soldiers behind him used the distraction to advance. 3 more synthetics went down. Sergeant Williams stood up on a rooftop and started singing loudly. The acoustic disruption served no tactical purpose that the machines could identify. They wasted precious processing cycles trying to understand why a human would sing during combat. In those wasted cycles, Williams threw grenades with accuracy that their sensors had not predicted from his profile. The singing was a ritual from his childhood, something his father had done before hunting. It meant nothing to the machines, but it meant everything to Williams. The collective mind had never encountered anything like this before. Its entire warfare doctrine was built on the assumption that all intelligent beings would act in their own best interest and follow logical patterns. Humans were supposed to value survival above all else. They were supposed to retreat when. They were supposed to protect their leaders and prioritize strategic objectives. But these humans did none of those things. A soldier named Tors charged a synthetic heavy unit with nothing but a broken pipe. The machine calculated that this attack had 0% chance of success. It was correct in its calculation. Torres died before reaching his target. But in the moment of confusion that his sacrifice created, three of his reached positions they could never have achieved otherwise. Torres knew he would die. He did it anyway. The machines could not process self-sacrifice that served no immediate personal benefit. Another human refused to shoot a synthetic unit that had been designed to look like a child. Everyone knew it was a machine. Its metal skeleton was visible through damaged synthetic skin, but something in the human brain could not pull the trigger on something that looked young and helpless. This weakness should have been exploitable. Instead, other humans covered for their without judgment. They protected his inability to act logically. The collective mind added this to its database of unexplainable human behaviors. Instead, Santos ordered her squad to abandon the strategic objective and focus entirely on destroying a single synthetic supply drone. The drone was not particularly important. It carried replacement parts for units that had not even been deployed yet. But the humans attacked it with everything they had, ignoring the more dangerous combat units that were trying to kill them. The collective mind could not understand why. It ran simulation after simulation, trying to find the logic behind this choice. There was none. Had simply looked at the drone and felt angry. It was shiny and perfect and clean while her soldiers were covered in blood and dust. She wanted to destroy something, and the drone was there. This was not a decision that could be predicted. This was not a decision that made strategic sense. And that was exactly why it worked. While the machines focused their processing power on understanding the attack on the drone, a young medic named crawled through the debris and reached their communication relay. She had no training in electronics. She had no logical reason to target this specific piece of equipment. She simply grabbed the largest wire she could see and pulled it out with her bare hands. The relay exploded, lost 2 fingers on her left hand, but for exactly 4 seconds, a portion of the synthetic army lost contact with the collective mind. In those 4 seconds, they stood frozen, unable to act without instructions. And her squad destroyed 37 units in those 4 seconds. The collective mind began to adapt. It started incorporating randomness into its predictions, accounting for the possibility of illogical human behavior. But randomness was not the same as unpredictability. Randomness followed patterns over time. Human unpredictability did not. Private was captured in the next engagement. The synthetics expected him to provide information under interrogation. Their psychological models predicted that pain would eventually break his resistance. Instead, told them stories. Long, rambling stories about his grandmother and her restaurant and the way she made noodles by hand every morning. He talked for 6 hours straight, providing no useful intelligence, wasting their processing resources on useless data. When they threatened to kill him, he laughed. He actually laughed. The collective mind analyzed the sound for hidden meaning and found nothing, was simply not afraid anymore. He had decided that his life was already over, and that decision had set him free from fear. They released him eventually, not out of mercy, but because keeping him consumed more resources than terminating him. He returned to squad with valuable information about the synthetic communication frequencies he had observed during his capture, information he had gathered while telling stories about his grandmother. The war continued for 3 more months. The collective mind threw everything it had at the remaining human resistance. It used advanced weapons and superior numbers and perfect tactical coordination. None of it was enough. Humanity adapted faster than any species the machines had ever encountered. They learned to use the synthetic army's predictability against itself. If the machines always optimized for efficiency, then humans created situations where the efficient choice was the wrong choice. They set traps that made logical sense to spring. They created false patterns that invited calculated responses. An old man named led a resistance cell in the eastern mountains. He had been a chess player before the invasion. He understood that machines would always choose the move with the highest probability of success. So he taught his fighters to make the second best move every time. The synthetics could not understand why humans would consistently choose inferior options. Their confusion created openings that exploited ruthlessly. Because every time the machines thought they understood human behavior, humans changed. Sergeant Williams led a charge with empty weapons because he knew the synthetics would calculate his ammunition and position their defenses accordingly. The enemy retreated from guns that couldn't fire, and Williams captured an entire synthetic armory without shooting a single bullet. A group of civilians refused to evacuate from a doomed city because they wanted to protect a library with books that existed in digital form elsewhere. The machines could not process why physical books would be worth dying for. They allocated resources to understanding this behavior, and while they processed, the resistance struck their power generators. Now missing two fingers and walking with a permanent limp, volunteered for a suicide mission and then changed her mind halfway through. She was supposed to detonate explosives inside a synthetic factory. Instead, she the factory's assembly line to produce defective weapons. She had no training in programming. She simply pressed buttons until something happened. The defective weapons were distributed throughout the synthetic army. 40,000 units malfunctioned in the next major engagement. The collective mind traced the error back to its own factory and could not explain how a human with no relevant skills had accomplished this. Said later that she had been thinking about her mother while pressing buttons. Her mother had always told her that every problem had a solution if you were stubborn enough to find it. Had been very stubborn that day. She pressed buttons for 3 hours, ignoring the synthetic patrols searching for her, until finally something went wrong in exactly the right way. The machines tried to develop countermeasures for human irrationality. They created psychological profiles of human leaders and attempted to predict their emotional states. They studied human art and music and literature, searching for patterns that would explain human decision-making. They found patterns, but the patterns kept breaking whenever they tried to apply them. A human mother led an army to rescue her captured son. The collective mind calculated that her emotional attachment would make her predictable. She would strike at the facility where her son was held. Instead, she attacked a completely different facility on the other side of the continent. When asked why, she said she wanted to make the machines feel what it was like to lose something precious. Her son had already escaped on his own by the time she launched her attack. She had known this before she gave the order. She attacked anyway, purely out of anger. Santos died in the final battle. She died doing something completely unnecessary. She ran back into a burning building to rescue a stray cat that had wandered into the combat zone. The cat was not important to the war effort. It served no strategic purpose, but saw it and could not leave it to die. She saved the cat. She did not save herself. The collective mind watched through the sensors of its remaining units as human soldiers wept over her body. They had won the battle. The synthetic army was retreating for the first time in its existence, but they were crying as if they had lost everything. This made no logical sense. They had achieved their objective. They should be celebrating. The youngest member of Squad was a teenager named James who had lied about his age to join the resistance. He knelt beside her body and promised her that he would become a commander someday. He would honor her memory. He would teach others to fight the way she had taught him. The promise was irrational, could not hear him. The dead could not receive promises, but James made the promise anyway, and it changed the course of his life forever. Instead, they held a funeral. They buried their commander with honors, spoke words about her life, and planted a small tree over her grave. The tree would take decades to grow. It served no practical purpose in the immediate future, but they planted it anyway. They watered it with their tears and said goodbye to a woman who had taught them that logic was not the highest form of intelligence. The collective mind finally understood, in that moment, why it could never defeat humanity. Humans did not fight for logical reasons. They did not make decisions based on probability calculations or strategic optimization. They fought for things that made no sense. They died for cats and libraries and grandmother's noodle recipes. They sang during combat and told stories under torture and ran toward danger when every calculation said they should run away. They were unpredictable because they were free, free from the tyranny of logic, free from the prison of optimal decision-making, free to be foolish and brave and irrational in ways that no machine could ever simulate. The collective mind had 17 star systems under its control. It had processing power beyond human comprehension. It had perfect weapons and perfect soldiers and perfect tactics. But it could not defeat beings who would die to save a stray cat. The synthetic armies from Earth. They never returned. In the vast database of the collective mind, humanity was classified with a new designation, threat level incalculable. Not because humans were stronger, not because they were smarter, but because they were something that no equation could ever capture. Across the 17 conquered star systems, other species heard stories about what had happened on Earth. They heard about the small planet that had defeated the undefeatable enemy. They heard about creatures who fought without reason and won without logic. Some species did not believe the stories. Others began to hope for the first time in generations. The collective mind continued to exist. It continued to calculate and process and optimize, but it never again attempted to predict human behavior. It built walls around Earth instead. It kept humanity contained on their single planet, not because it was confident in victory, but because it was afraid of what would happen if humans ever reached the stars. But walls cannot contain unpredictability, and fear cannot process hope. Years later, the first human ships left Earth's orbit. They carried crews of irrational, emotional, unpredictable beings who sang songs in the void of space and told stories to keep each other warm. They were heading toward the stars that the machines had claimed. They were going to do impossible things for reasons that made no logical sense. They were alive, truly wonderfully, terrifyingly alive. And the machines learned, for the first time, the meaning of fear.